Hi, I'm Shana Goldberg, and it's really wonderful and special for me to be here with you together tonight. It's a little bit later here in Alunchfit than it is for, I think, most of you in America. And we're after a long, emotionally draining day here, but it's so meaningful for me to be able to end this day by discussing a topic that's so close to my heart. And that's the topic tonight of how do we inspire ourselves and our children to grow religiously. So as parents, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to effectively really effectively impart our deepest values to our children. And this is very much something that I'm still working on. By no means I'm an expert parent in any way. I have no special degree or different experiences than anyone else. I'm the parent, thank God, bless you, the parent of 5 children, 4 boys, ages 17, 15, 13, and 11. Which is a big adjustment after growing up the oldest of 4 girls, and my youngest daughter is 8. And I'm very much in the midst of those challenging teenage years. So the things that I'm going to share with you tonight are very much my thoughts and feelings, and I encourage you to feel free to submit any questions that you have in the chat box. I'm going to address them at the end, not during the lecture, but I'd be happy to take a look at them afterwards. So I want to start off, I was thinking how to start, and I was thrown back to the opening lines of this well-known parenting book called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk by Adele Faber and Elaine Mieslich. I actually remember reading this book as a kid. My mother had it, and I would often pick it up. I was pretty young at the time. And the book starts with these words: I was a wonderful parent before I had children. I was an expert on why everyone else was having problems with theirs. And then I had 3 of my own. There's something so true, so honest about this, right? How real is it? I think I feel this over and over at each stage. They write here, living with real children can be humbling. Every morning I would tell myself, today is going to be different. And every morning was a variation of the one before. You gave her more than me. That's the pink cup. I want the blue cup. This oatmeal looks like throw up. He punched me. I never touched him. I won't go to my room. You're not the boss over me. Until they finally wore me down. So what I want to share with you again tonight are by no means what I would say answers or perfect solutions to the question of how to succeed in transmitting values. Rather, I'm just sharing some of the thoughts and insights that have evolved for me over time together with my husband that we found to be helpful in our own life and can maybe be helpful for others. I want to start with a quote that my husband shared with me years ago, early on in our marriage. I think we were married a few months. It was from an article in an old Jewish Action magazine from the summer of 1989 by Dr. Mordechai Breuer, where he was discussing the educational philosophy of his grandfather, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And the line that jumped out to my husband, Judah, was this: in education, let ourselves be guided by trust and truth, not by fear. So this summer, we will, Mir Hashem, be married 19 years, and I can't tell you how much time we've spent discussing this line. Rabbi Hirsch believed that the opposite of fear is trust. Trust, though, is not always something that we feel instinctively, and perhaps for good reason, meaning fear, the emotion of fear, is there because at times it's really important. At times it protects us. It protects us physically from the risk of danger. It protects us emotionally from being hurt or feeling an immense amount of pain. So it's important to be aware of that feeling of fear, to take note of it and not to ignore it. But then at the same time, we have to think rationally about where to go from there. Meaning now that I've considered that fear, How much room do I want to give it? How much power do I want to give it? Is it something that's leading me in the direction that I want to go, or is it something that I could choose to ignore or put aside? The problem is that often fear overwhelms us, and it stops us from feeling empowered to make the best decisions that we can. So I think fear is a huge factor in parenting. If we were live right now, meaning if we were in person, and I so wish, I would prefer speaking to people in person and seeing your faces, but I would ask you to think for a minute and then maybe throw out, if you were comfortable, some of the fears that you feel in parenting. So let's just stop for a minute so everyone could just think for a few seconds to themselves, what are their greatest fears in parenting? And when I was thinking of mine, I think, up there is, how will my children turn out? What does it say about me that I have a child like this, who behaves like this, who dresses like this, who talks like this? What will others think of me if this is what my children are like? Not just what does it say about me in terms of my own self-perception, but what will other people think of me? Is there something not normal about us? Are we the only ones struggling like this? Are we the only ones having a hard time? I look around and everybody looks so great and so wonderful. How come I feel like I'm drowning or like I'm barely keeping my head above water? Have we made really, really bad mistakes? Are we doing everything wrong? I remember years ago, a psychologist that's a close friend of the family said to us that you have to do a lot of really bad things for a lot of time to really mess up your kids. So that was comfortable. I thought maybe I've only done some bad things for some amount of time. But those questions of, are we normal? And what does this mean? And what do other people think? And have we really messed up? I think are all fears that we struggle with. And when these fears start popping up in our heads, I'm not saying to disregard them, because sometimes, again, they're clues to things that we're supposed to be paying more attention to. But how can we pay attention to them and then move forward from a place of trust? So that's really the topic for tonight. Called it Inspiring Ourselves and Our Children, but really the subtopic is inspiring ourselves to trust in ourselves and inspiring us to trust in our children and to teach them to trust in themselves. So trust and fear is, I think, a dichotomy that comes up in all areas and with all kinds of decision making. And there's a lot of decision making that goes on parenting. And I want to give you an example right now that's not related to parenting, but just as a really strong example that has stuck in my head for a long time about how fears play such a powerful role and stop us sometimes from doing what we know is really right. Okay, so many, many years ago, I was a teacher and lucky enough to teach in Mayanot and TNEC, and I taught juniors and seniors. And part of teaching seniors is oftentimes being privy to the deliberation process that they faced as they chose the seminaries, the Shana B'Aretz programs, where they wanted to spend a year. And I had a student, very much beloved to this day. This is not her real name, Miriam. And she called me at 10 o'clock on the night that the Israel decisions were due at midnight and asked me if she could come over to talk. I lived in Birkenfield at the time because she had no clue, in her words, absolutely no clue where she wanted to spend her year. She was deliberating between school X and school Y. And she came over and she sat down on the couch. And the first thing that I said to her was, well, tell me, Miriam, like, if I just asked you straight out, where do you want to go? Like, what do you think? And without pausing, mamash, immediately right away, she said, I think school X. So I said, so that's amazing. Look, you do know where you want to go. Why don't we go sign up right now, register for school X? So she said, but no, Mrs. Goldberg, like, I don't know, what if the girls are better in school Y? So I said to her, well, okay, I could hear that fear. Do you want to go to school Y because maybe the girls are better? So she said, no, I think I want to go to school X. So I said, wonderful. Like, look, we did it. That didn't take so long. She said, no, but you don't understand. What if the teachers are better in school Y? Do you want to go to school Y because the teachers may be better? No, I think I want to go to school X. But what if the learning style is more matim for me in school Y? And we went on like that. What if the location is better in school Y? We went through all her fears. And finally, I turned to her and I said, Miriam, it sounds like you want to go to school X. And she said, you're right. Thank you so much. This was so helpful. And we both had a good laugh as I pointed out that I really had not said anything. But basically, all these fears that have popped in her head that were real, were legitimate. She had to consider them. Were the girls really better in school? Why? I mean, maybe they were, but that fear did not make her want to go to school Y. She still wanted to go to school X. After we were able to kind of confront all the fears and face them and think about what role we wanted them to play, it was clear to her that she still wanted to go to school X, and therefore we knew that that was the right choice for her. And I think oftentimes it's true. If we're able to clear away the fears that we face, which are legitimate and real, but we still have to decide and take control of how much place we want to give them, then we could get to the underlying trust that is so important in shaping really who we want to be. So what I want to do tonight is share with you 4 concrete parenting ideas that are based on trust, that have been very helpful, again, to me and my husband in our own parenting. The first one is an idea that I like to call core values. By core values, I mean thinking about what are those values that are central to who I am, or essential to who we are as a couple. Have we stopped to think about what are the core things that we want to pass on to our children? Now, core values could be religious values, right? A core value could be, it's really important to me to have a connection to Hashem. A core value could be commitment to halacha. A core value could be tefillah, having a central place in my life, or Shabbat being the center of my week. The role that chesed plays in our everyday. Or a core value could be, what is my relationship to Medinat Yisrael, to Eretz Yisrael? And core values can also be human, universal values that are not specifically religious. Like, I'll share with you 3 of the core values in the Goldberg House that my kids can recite to you are the importance of handling your frustration appropriately. Not always easy. We're not always successful at that. The importance of treating people with respect, and the importance of doing your responsibilities, whatever your responsibilities may be. So it's true, these are big picture values. They're sweeping, they're grand, they're defining to who we are. They're values that we identify as so important to us in life that we want to carry them forward with us always. I always want myself and my children to know how to handle our frustration appropriately. I always want us to place Shabbos as the center of our week. I always want us to think about how we could do chesed. So core values are big and they're grand in the sense that we want to carry them with us always, but they also need some concrete manifestation, some bottom line, some what I like to call non-negotiable, that we know we are not giving up on that. We will incorporate that into our life no matter what, no matter what the circumstances are. At the same time, though, if I know that I have a core value and I have a bottom line non-negotiable, and I believe in that core value, then if that's clear to me and to my children that that value is important to us, at that point, I could trust that as we and our children navigate life, we will figure out in every situation, and they will hopefully learn to figure out in their lives how to bring that value to expression in their specific circumstances. Okay, so let's take a few examples. Tefillah, davening, is a value that's really, really important to me in the sense of I believe that it's important to talk to Hashem. I want to have him as a presence in my life. I want to feel like whether there's something really big and really hard, I could turn to him, or even if I'm driving around the parking lot of Rami Levi, the big supermarket here, and it's already been 10 minutes, sometimes I just find myself, Hashem, I need a spot. Now, do I really believe Hashgacha? I'm not getting into the stories of, how much control Hashem has over did that person just pull out because Hashem made them to. Just more in the sense of like, I'm in conversation with Hashem and he's in my life and I turn to him and I dive into him and I share with him my feelings and that I want that door to be open. So the same way that, thank God, my sisters and I are in regular contact and life is very busy now, but there are long, long periods my life where I spoke to every single member of my family, my sisters and my parents every single day. And I felt like, okay, even if I don't have anything really big to tell them today, just the structure of my day includes talking to them, and that relationship that we keep up by being in touch day to day means that then when there's something more significant from either of us, we know that we have that foundation there. Okay, so a long time ago, I made tefillah, davening 3 times a day, a non-negotiable for me. I'm not saying that that should be everybody's non-negotiable, but for me at some point I said, 3 times a day I want to daven Shachrit, Mincha, and Maariv. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's a pretty high non-negotiable, but this still leaves open a lot of questions, as in, how long will my tefillot be? How much kavana will I have? Will I daven shachrit while I'm half getting my kids' lunches ready? Will I make an effort to attend a minyan? There's a lot of questions that still come up, even with that bottom line non-negotiable of davening shachrit, mincha, and maariv every day. So when it comes to my kids, I would say that tefillah, they know, is a core value in our home. And the non-negotiable part of it has always been, hey, tefillah is really important to us, and talking to Hashem is really important to us. We don't go a day without talking to Hashem. Like, you wake up and you daven. That's what we do. Right? We don't skip davening, or we don't do other things. Like, we daven. But what time will they wake up? That we never made non-negotiable. Or how formal will the tefillah be? How long will they daven for? Will they actually get themselves to shul? Will they daven in a minyan? There's a lot of questions that have been left open. They knew the bottom line, meaning they saw that tefillah is important to us and that our own standards and behavior show them that we take tefillah very seriously. But with that value in place and the non-negotiable of you don't go a day without davening, so then there is a lot of room. And honestly, like, if sometimes a kid has a day where he wakes up, and especially my younger kids, and they wake up and they say, have you daven? And then, well, you got to go daven. And then about 5 minutes later, they walk back into the room and you're like, did you daven? And they're like, yeah, I daven. Okay, 5 minutes tefillah. Today was a 5-minute tefillah day, or maybe less. But still, davening as a value, or that we don't go a day without talking to Hashem, is there. So everybody will figure out what their non-negotiables are for themselves and for their children. But I think the main part is that there's a value that everybody is aware of, and that hopefully with trust, children will internalize over time and figure out how they want to bring it to expression. And a super important part of this is that it's a value first for you too. It's hard to pass over a value that you yourself don't really identify with. Years ago, I remember having a meal at a very well-established, respected family in a certain community that were known for everything that they contributed and the roles that they played. And in the afternoon, as we were sitting around, the 10-year-old boy was having a conversation with his 3-year-old sister. And let's say her name was Leah. So he said to her, Leah, how old are you? And she would say, I'm 3. And then he would say, but remember, how old are you when we go to Disney World? And she would say, I'm 2. And they did this routine a few times. And I noticed the parents turning bright red, because in essence, what had happened is that even though probably honesty was a value in their home, and certainly not cheating on tests or not cheating on taxes, of course, but that kind of unwritten but very strong behavior of going to Disney World and having their youngest lie about her age so that they could save some money made a real impression on this child. So when we talk about a value, when we talk about a non-negotiable, it has to be non-negotiable also for ourselves as well. Okay? The same thing, and the idea of core values is something that I often speak about with my students. I will share an example of something that happened with a student of mine years ago in Migdal-Uz, and these examples really play out all the time. But it was at the end of a year, and I was talking to a student who was headed to a secular college, and she had come from a family that was Orthodox. They were observant, but their commitment, was it wasn't always as solid as maybe she would like it to be going forward. And we were talking about kind of where she was headed from there and what she envisioned in her future, and especially on a college campus. And we ended up talking about Shabbos, about Shabbat. And she was telling me how Shabbos is really important to her and it's obviously a real value to her. But she wasn't sure at the time, sitting at the end of her year in Migdalos, exactly how that would look in university, which is true because it's really hard to imagine when you're in one environment how something's going to look when you're in a very different environment. And I always encourage my students to know what their values are and also know what their bottom lines are. You know, the line that like, no matter what, no matter how challenging it is, you're not going to cross that. So I said to her, what's your bottom line? What's your non-negotiable? So of course she said, Chilul Shabbat. Of course I'm not going to be Mechal Shabbos. And of course I'm not going to do anything that's asur and that's not halachic. But she said, given the home that I grew up in and the standards that are normal for me, I don't know after that, like if, you know, there's something going on campus and my non-Jewish friend brings in a ticket for me, will I go to that? She had all kinds of questions. And I said, okay, listen, you know Shabbos is really important to you. And you know that you're not going to be Mechala Shabbos. When you get to the campus, I trust that you're going to figure out how to take it from there. Now, she got to campus, and actually in the beginning of the year, after she would go to Kabbalat Shabbat and she would have dinner in the Hillel. So sometimes she would hang out afterwards with a group of kids that included some religious kids, but also some Jewish kids that weren't religious and hadn't grown up in religious homes. And she said, of course, she was not being Mechala Shabbat in any way, but they were on their phones or they were watching things. And over time, even though her bottom line had been no chilul Shabbat, she began to feel that this is not the Shabbat that she wanted for herself. This is not where she wanted to be in terms of her Shabbos experience. And she changed her behavior based on that. And I've thought about that example a lot because I feel like if I would have told her at the end of the year, you must do this, or you cannot hang out with these people, and she hadn't been in that place herself, I'm not sure that she would have arrived there, that it would have lasted in the way that it did after she was trusted to figure out for herself what's important for her. So that's an example of trust when it came to a student and kind of advising them at the end of the year. I think another value that comes up all the time that people deliberate about is our connection to Israel, to Medina Israel, to Eretz Israel. If for a family that doesn't live in Israel, Israel is important to them and it's a value. But what do they want that to mean? And what do they want to give over to their children? So the value is Israel is really, really, really important to us. And we feel very connected. But does that mean that we're striving to make aliyah? Does that mean that when we give tzedakah, we try to give it to tzedakot that are in Israel? Does that mean that when we vacation as a family, instead of vacationing other places, we go to Israel? Does it mean that we're involved in Israel advocacy, that we're involved in AIPAC and activism? Does it mean that when we're buying products, we buy Israeli products? When Israel is a value, there's so many different ways that different children in the family and the parents themselves can manifest that as long as they know what their value is and what the bottom line non-negotiable aspect of it is. So core values is something that I think gives structure, gives consistency, gives meaning, while also leaving a lot of room for things to evolve. Situations are going to change. You can't predict always your different children's personalities, the situations that they find themselves in. We want them to be committed to these values, even though we cannot control always, even though we may think we can, but as your kids get older, you realize you can't always control ad hasof all the way till the end, how they're going to make decisions. But if our kids know what we stand for, and they could tell you the values of your house, whether or not they will do everything we want them to do, that we can't guarantee. But if we know that they at least know the values of our home and they've internalized them, then we could hope that they will be able to bring them to expression in the ways that are right for them. So that's the idea of core values. The second idea is verbalization. Verbalization, to me, means not being afraid to talk about what we believe in, what we stand for, not feeling silly or cheesy or corny, no matter how many times, like, Ima, we know that you've said it already. We know that you care about that. We know that you and Abby know, Mom, Dad, okay, we got it. and still continuing to drill it into their heads in whatever, ways you do at meals or here and there, just talking about the things that are important to you. Well, years ago, I'll share a personal story that about 6 years ago, my husband and I went for some parenting therapy. I will do a shout out to Esther Ben-Gigi, who's an amazing parenting therapist in Yerushalayim. She's a therapist that's been trained as part of this program, Ayaka. My kids were young at the time. My oldest was 11. And if you ask how we ended up there, well, we were at a family simcha with all my cousins and cousins' children. And one of my children, who was 7 at the time, had a major tantrum on Friday night, screaming through the streets of Efrat. And it was not just embarrassing and, oh my gosh, what's everyone going to think about us, but how could I have a child like this? And where did we go wrong? And all the normal fears that come up. So that was Friday night. And then on Shabbos morning, of course, it was like as if that never happened and the child was all happy, snappy. And of course, didn't remember that he had completely taken every ounce of energy out of his parents the night before. And we were staying in a house where they had a cute little dog. I'm not an animal fan at all, but this dog was pretty cute. And this child said to us, we want a dog. I want a dog. And I remember my husband was so exasperated at that moment. He's like, well, we're not getting a dog because I can't afford a dog, because if we got a dog, then we would have to pay for the dog to get therapy, since that's what's going on here. And everyone seems to need, their help in their different ways. And we were laughing about that, and the kids were also laughing. And then at some point, we're like, you know what? We don't want to send anyone else to therapy. We want to go to therapy. We want to talk to someone about our feelings and what we are experiencing. And basically, that's what happened. We got a good referral from my cousin. And we ended up at this therapist, and we walked in there and we thought, we're pretty good parents, and what's wrong with these children that we have? And the first thing that she said to us was, so tell me, what are the rules of your house? Or she said, do you have rules? And we said, of course we have rules. We're strong parents, and we know how to, discipline. And she said, okay, what are your rules? She said, by the way, a rule is something that everyone knows, and it applies across the board, and there's a very clear consequence. And we started to think, and we realized we don't have any rules, not rules that were across the board in our home that everybody knew that had a very set consequence. So that was disappointing. And then she said, so tell me something that's bothering you. And for some reason, I guess one of the things that we brought up is we said, I don't know, it just seems to be a constant struggle with our kids, that they're not coming to the table on Friday night for Shalom Aleichem, for Kiddush. We call them, they don't come, they leave. How many times do we have to, why don't they understand? And she said to us, well, do they know that they have to? Do they know that that's what you're expecting of them? Have you ever told them that that's a rule, or that that's a set thing in your home? And of course, Judah and I looked at each other and we said, yes, of course, we've told them. What do you mean? We were clear. And then we went home that day and we called a little family meeting, and we sat everyone down on the couch and we said, okay, guys, we just want to make it really, really clear that we have a very strong expectation that everybody comes to the table for Shalom Aleichem, and they stay there through Ishet Chayil and Kiddush and Hamotzi and soup. And after the soup, if then you want to go and you want to read on the couch, or you want to play, or you want to whatever. Now, our children sat there and they said, okay, you never told us that. You never told us that it was the rule. And we were shocked. She was right. They said, we knew that you wanted us to come, or that you didn't like it when we left, but you never told us that that is what you're expecting of us. And that really hit home, because a lot of times I think we had thought that if we just act in a certain way, or we don't need to verbalize it, almost it's beneath us to have to verbalize something that we thought was so clear. And she taught us, this therapist, that we don't need to be afraid to make things clear if they're important to us. Once we've decided that this is something that matters to us, then we should make sure that our kids know it. So in this family, we like to know what time you're coming home at night. I'm not saying that I'm going to give you a curfew in this conversation. one of my kids now. But yes, we don't let you just stay out till whatever time you want because you're not so old. We need to know, at least give me a time that you're coming home. Accountability is important to us. Saying it out loud, what our expectations are, and verbalizing them, and not being afraid to be that parent who is, needs to verbalize it, is something that has been very helpful to us. So that's verbalization. The next idea here is positivity. We all want our children, right, to love the things that are dear to us. And if Torah is important to us, if mitzvot are important to us, then we want them to have a positive orientation towards religious life. But first, I think we need to stop and ask ourselves, well, what motivates our behavior? What's our conception of God? What is our relationship with our avodat Hashem, with mitzvot? Is it positive? Is it warm? Is it loving? Is it embracing? Is it inviting? Is it something that we're excited about? Or is our conception of God as a vengeful, punishing, angry God who's looking to get us when we mess up? Sometimes we're not conscious of the fact that even though we feel or we say we want something in our life, our kids may be feeling that it's coming from a place of fear. And fear is not very attractive, meaning it's hard to passionately motivate someone to invite them to do something that you're not really doing from a place of want or a place of desire, but coming from a place of fear of punishment or fear of, where this will lead. So fear is a very powerful short-term motivator. No question about it. It's a very powerful short-term motivator of behavior. It just doesn't always bring about long-term commitment. And this is something that was really, I think, driven home to me when I think I was in college at the time, or maybe a little older. I read the book Off the Derech by the author Faranek Margulies, who interviewed hundreds of men and women who had left Orthodoxy, trying to look for some common underlying thread or some common denominators that might help us understand what might lead somebody to leave such a rich, tradition that has so many positives. And one precipitating factor that she found is that a lot of the people who had left Orthodoxy had been motivated by some kind of scare tactic at some point when they were children. So one of the incidents that I remember reading there was a woman who said that when she was in 4th grade, her teacher turned off the lights in their classroom. She made it pitch black, and then she put on a cassette, a tape at that time, of people screaming, shrieking and screaming and yelling, "We're hanging by our tongues in Gehenna for speaking Lashon Hara. It wasn't worth it. Don't do it." And her teacher, this is what she played to them in 4th grade. Now, this woman recounted that it worked magic. She was so scared that she stopped speaking Lashon Hara for a good few years, not a word. But then she grew up, and at some point in her adult life, she said, who would want to be part of a religion where God hangs you by your tongue and punishes you or tortures you because when you were little, you spoke some Lashon Hara? And she said, this isn't for me. And unfortunately, over my personal experience in teaching, I've had this experience where sometimes I'm talking to a student that's struggling with questions of faith, struggling with her relationship with God, struggling with her commitments. And when you dig a little bit deeper, and it doesn't matter if it's the brightest student who's headed to the top Ivy League college, I've had conversations with students that have indicated that a lot of their relationship to their religious life is based in fear. So I remember a very, very bright student. I'm in the middle of a conversation, and I said to her, she was talking to me about her struggles and being religious. And I was just playing it out with her. I said, okay, so what if you would decide not to be religious? Wanted her to take ownership of her religious life. She said, but what do you mean? Like, I can't do that. So I was waiting for her to give me some major reason why. And instead she said, because then I'm going to get put in the washing machine. And I said, excuse me, what? What are you talking about? She's like, the washing machine. What, you don't know about the washing machine? And I said, I grew up in like a frum house. My father's a rabbi, but like, I really don't know what you're talking about. And then she went on to tell me about how the teachers in the school that she had gone to were always talking about the washing machine that you're going to go through at the end of your life that's going to cleanse you of all your sins. And the more sins you have, the more painful an experience it's going to be. You know, I understand what the teachers were getting at. I understand the desire to make young students take hold of the fact that they will be accountable at some point in their life. But that fear of wanting to imbue some, I guess, yirat shamayim, but from a place of just raw fear, I don't think holds up in the long run. And even if it's not fear of God or fear of punishment, let's say it's just fear of parents, right? Parents' punishment, or my parents are going to take this away or do that, or whatever it may be. What happens when the child is no longer under that watchful eye of their parents? What happens when they go off to Israel for the year? What happens when they're on a college campus? What happens when they're living an independent life, or they're married and they're building their own home? If it's rooted in fear, and at some point that fear factor, for whatever reason, no longer exists, or even if it's fear of God, but they've been taught to think that lightning's going to strike, and then they do something and lightning doesn't strike, and that fear no longer is as heavy for them, what happens then? We want our children to develop trust in their own values from a positive place, so that they're able to make good decisions even when there is no fear. So Shabbat, for example, we want Shabbat to be a wonderful experience, the highlight, the center of our week, a time where there's uplifting feelings and there's activities in the house that they look forward to, where there's enchanting sounds and there's delicious smells and tastes and images, and it's a visceral, powerful experience. We don't want Shabbos to be associated with angst or scolding. If a child reaches for an electric toy, or if they giggle, after Netilat Yadayim before Hamotzi. Not that we can introduce concepts and model behavior, meaning could already teach a young child about the concept of muksa, about the concept of malacha, of things being asor on Shabbos, but without fearing that if my little kid picks up a crayon on colors on Shabbos, oh no, this means that they're not going to be Shomer Shabbos and they don't want to be religious. I mean, it is what it is. They don't really understand. They picked it up, or maybe they're testing, and doesn't mean that we can't have rules or we can't have non-negotiables, but gently educating or pushing in the right direction, exposing children to ideas, making them understand that we believe in commitment, that we believe in ideals and values that are greater than just us and mashabalanu, as they say in Hebrew, whatever we're feeling or wanting in the moment. Teaching them about living for a higher purpose, or having a mission, having something that you believe in. These are things that we could talk about from a positive place, even as we set expectations, even as we have, sometimes maybe even consequences, but not from a place of punishment being the motivator. So I think the more that we're aware of the positive language that we use in our life, or the positivity, the happiness, the joy that we bring to a life of Avodat Hashem, the more naturally attractive it becomes. Finally, the last idea that I want to speak about is demonstrating trust in our values. Kids, I think, easily sense fear, right? They know in so many different circumstances. I know my kids could see if I tense up, they're like, Ema, what's wrong? And you don't want that. You are nervous about something, but you don't want them to feel. You're like, no, everything's fine. They're like, no, I see that you're nervous, you're scared. They sense our fear. And I think when it comes to our values, and when it comes to our religious values especially, we don't want them to think that we don't authentically believe in the inherent attractiveness of our traditions, meaning the more fear that they sense in us, the more they begin to wonder, why aren't they confident? If this is something so powerful and so amazing and so wonderful, if they really believe that this is real and this is the emes and this is what's true, so then why aren't they exuding that confidence? Even if kids can't give words to that feeling, I think it's something that they detect and they know. They're very good at knowing when something's real for us. The more confidence that we exude in our values, the more our kids understand that there's something that's really, really important to us. So I happen personally to think about this a lot when I think about the home that I grew up in. My parents, Rabbi Yaakov and Abby Lerner, were the rabbi and rebbetzin of the Young Yeshiva Great Neck for 45 years. They actually just made Aliyah a few months ago in September. So amazing to have them here with us. So in Great Neck, I mean, the community was very diverse. There was a very wide spectrum of people in terms of the observance level and the commitment. And the commitment and how makpid people were in halacha in most of the homes were a different standard than the standard was in our home. At least growing up in the 80s, the world has changed and Great Neck has changed. But in the 80s, there were very few families that really lived their lives exactly the way that my parents did. And I'm sure that my parents were nervous about surrounding influences. I mean, I know they were. We've now spoken about this many times. Nobody dressed the way that they wanted their children to dress. And we were exposed to all kinds of things, in our watch the best movies in our friends' homes, or I go for a sleepover. And my friends didn't necessarily daven on Sunday morning when we weren't at school, or wash before they had pizza or a bagel. And I think often about the fact that it would have been so much easier in a way for my parents to just forbid us from going anywhere, forbid us from going to any of our friends' houses, or to have a social life, or to do any of the things that weren't exactly their standards, rather than what they did do, which was constantly explaining their expectations and affirming their trust in us that we would rise to each challenge, even though it would be difficult. So we go up to sleepover and they say, I'm sure that you'll figure out, that when to daven, or maybe your friend will daven with you, or maybe you'll tell her that you just need to daven a little bit before you, sit down to watch your movie. And not only do I think about this, but not only did they not speak down about others, but they taught us to be proud of our own commitments and feel almost this sense of pride in our lifestyle, while at the same time emphasizing the tremendous chesed and midot tovot and mesirat nefesh for Judaism that stood out in the lives of those around us. So while they didn't use the language of trust and fear that I like to use now, it was clear that they were secure enough in their own values, that they really trusted their values, and they really thought that they were shaveh, they were worth it, and that we should embrace them. And because of that, they were able to teach us to respect others who were different, while also trusting that we had something special as well. And that's, I guess, always been the goal with my own children, to try to develop their confidence in our approach without scaring them about people who are different, people to the right and people to the left. And, those lines of, but in the Schwartz family, they say that they could stay out all night, or in the Schwartz family, they don't have any rules about their cell phones, and they don't have any limits on how much time they're allowed to be on their cell phone or when it goes off at night. Or in the Schwartz family, they're allowed to watch these movies, or in the Schwartz, right? And that's great. And we say all the time, there's different ways of doing things, but in the Goldberg family, this is how we do it here. And this is why we do it that way. And I'll say to my kids, and of course they don't like this, but my parents said this to me often too, and when you have a family and you're in charge, so you'll be able to make whatever decisions you want, and maybe I'll like them or I won't like them, or I'll agree with them or I won't agree with them, but I'll respect that those are your decisions, even if I don't see eye to eye. But this is what we do now, and this is why we do it. which is not easy, and often in battles with my children, the way everybody is. Sometimes, once in a while, you get a little bit of nachat. It happened to be that this week, one of my children came home and he said, I feel like we have a good approach to cell phones in our family. So I said, oh, what do you mean? And he said, well, I was talking to one of my friends who said, it's a sort to have the smartphones and they're terrible and they're the root of all evil and can't have a smartphone and no one can use a smartphone responsibly. And he's like, and I was talking to another friend who was like, why no one should have filters and nobody should have any limits on their phone. And he's like, I like that we have phones, but that you speak to us often about how to use them and how to use them appropriately, and that they're very powerful and they could be used for good or for bad. And we need to kind of limit and be aware of that. So that was a little moment of nachad in a sea of challenges. But I think that the idea of being able to trust our values, no matter what's going on around us, is something that is not simple. And I also think about now the fact that I live in Alon Shvat, that the challenge that my parents had was different than the challenge that I now face, meaning my parents raising us in Great Neck. So the challenge was that everybody around us was different, amazing, wonderful, but just different in terms of their standards of practice. And the challenge for my parents was, how could we raise kids who trust and feel pride in their own values while not judging or looking down at others? In Alon Shvat, we're living in a more homogeneous community where people are maybe more similar to us in terms of their values and their overall observance. But that doesn't mean it doesn't come with its own challenges, because now my kids say, but this family, he's the Rosh Yeshiva. This family, their mom is this. And they don't even make so why do you and Abba have to be so rigid about? And then it's true. Amazing, wonderful families, but this is how we do it in our house. And this is why we do it. And I think the goal is that they understand our values and understand why those are our values. We don't just say because that's how it is, but explaining to them why, including them in that conversation of why these are our values, while also hoping and teaching and educating that they can respect others. One, I think, wonderful moment that my husband and I experienced many years ago. My oldest Shmuel is now a senior. He's graduating high school and headed to Yeshivat Har Etzion to Hesder next year. But when he was in first grade and we were living in America, he was in a school that had a wide spectrum of families, some of whom were observant and some of whom were not. And one Sunday he called a friend over, I will call him Josh, to come play with him. And we were struck, my husband and I, that when this kid came to play, he came without a kippah. Now, we knew his family wasn't Shomer Shabbat, and we knew that they were not religious and fully dati, but we kind of, I guess, expected naively that they go to a religious school and he's coming over to a friend. Of course, he would come with a kippah, but he didn't. And we were very curious to see how my son would react, because my son Shmuel, he notices everything. And for a while, they sat down, they were playing some kind of board game. And for a while, he didn't notice. And then at one point, he looked up and all of a sudden it struck him. And he said, Josh, where's your kippah? And Josh said to him, oh, well, in my family, we don't wear kippot and tzitzit at home, which I don't think Shmuel had ever been exposed to before at that age. And we were waiting to see how he responded. And he answered, oh, in my family, we do wear kippot and tzitzit at home. And that was that. And they went on and they continued playing. Now, I knew that this would for sure scare some people, or definitely be the grounds for immediately transferring schools. But we were delighted. We were delighted by his response and reassured that he was confident and proud that he wore kippah and tzitzit even when he was at home, without being shaken that there are other people in the world, even in his class, who may not, and without mocking that child or without being condescending or telling him that he's doing something wrong, even if maybe inside he felt that maybe that's true, or afterwards he had questions, but he certainly at that moment didn't act that way to that child. So it was for sure cause for curiosity, but it didn't leave him arrogant, or it didn't leave him accusatory or suspicious. And I think oftentimes if we try to hold those two things together, meaning how do we teach our children to feel integrity, proud of their values, and also at the same time be sensitive to others, or even understand that not everyone out there in the world is like them, and that doesn't have to feel threatening to them. Sometimes I tell my children that if somebody's so threatened by something, it often means that they're not feeling secure enough, right? Even if my child is reacting so defensively about something, we have a difference of opinion, and he's getting so defensive. I say, why are you getting so defensive? Like, do you really, really feel that? Like, if you feel that way, then own it and take responsibility and back it, And a lot of times it will come out that he's not so sure all of a sudden. Maybe I made a good point, or he's not as secure as he was beforehand, and that insecurity leads people to feel threatened. The more secure we are in our values, and the more we allow our children to feel that security, the more trust I hope that they will feel in them. So this is so important, I think, for enabling internalization. We want, and also because we really want our children to learn to trust their own instincts and their own feelings. We want them to be able to do what's right and to make good decisions no matter where they are or who they're with. And maybe this is even most important, not in a religious sense, but when it comes to other people questioning them or doubting them, right? Our child is feeling something. They're feeling like, that's not, that teacher he didn't speak appropriately, or he spoke in a way that embarrassed that kid. And then others like, no, what's the big deal? Why are you feeling that way? We want our children to trust their instincts, to trust their intuitions, to be wary of people who don't inspire their trust, to be wary of people who, tell them not to trust themselves, or who give them that butterfly in their stomach. We want them to pay attention to that inner radar when they feel like something's off, especially when they're interacting with adults, with mentors, and especially when they're looking for a spouse. That ability to trust their intuition and to feel like, no, I trust the things that are important to me, and I trust the way that I feel, and I trust that if something's not sitting right with me, then even if everyone else is telling me, but he's such an awesome guy, and what do you mean that you're not sure if you want to get engaged, that I'm able, to feel confident that my children could trust their feelings. And I think this comes from parents exuding trust, both in themselves and in their children. So I called this topic, I called it Inspiring Growth in Ourselves and in Our Children. And I think the things that I spoke about, the reason I called it In Ourselves, even though I've spoken mostly about our children, is because the things that I spoke about here first require us to really think for ourselves about our own core values. What do we really believe deep down? Before we get to our kids and the education we want to provide for them, sometimes when we're honest with ourselves, we realize that we're stagnant, or we're not feeling inspired right now. We've forgotten what's important to us, or we feel lost or confused about what our values and priorities are. And I'll end with one final story, which is years ago, I got a call from a student who I had taught many years earlier in high school, and went off to Israel, and came back from Israel college, married, had 2 kids. And she called to talk after many years, and to say that she felt very lost and detached from her Judaism. She didn't feel connected or committed internally anymore. And even though she was going through a bunch of the motions, it felt fake to her, and she didn't feel inspired. And as we began to talk, it came out that she had taken on lots of things during her year in Israel that she was just no longer doing, or at least no longer feeling connected to. The commitments she had made to how she would dress, or the way that she would daven, how much she would learn. Now, she was calling in tears that this must mean that she no longer cared, and she no longer had any Jewish values. But as I was talking to her, it just felt so clear to me that instead of kind of being educated or thinking years back about core values, she had been taught, whether by her teachers or by herself, instead of thinking about core values, to commit to very specific things, But the things that she had committed to, I mean, some of them just weren't relevant anymore when she had 2 kids and was in school full time. She just couldn't learn the amount that she had committed to learning back when she left Israel, or she didn't want to dress exactly how she dressed then. But we ended up having a really great conversation about core values. It's actually one of the conversations that really got me thinking about this idea, because I was confident from knowing her that those core values were there. She cared about tzniut. She was a tzanua person. She cared about tefillah and davening. She just couldn't daven for amounts of time that she used to when she was 18 and didn't have many other responsibilities. She still wanted chesed to be part of her life. She still cared about Torah. But she had to think about, at the age of 20, whatever, with her 2 kids, what that meant for her now. And once she did that and she sat down and she thought about, well, what are my values? What are my priorities? And how do I want them to manifest themselves right now in my life? Then she was able to then think about how she wanted to talk about those values with her children. So I think when we think about inspiring our children, we have to take a few steps back first and think about inspiring ourselves, thinking about our core values, verbalizing to ourselves what our priorities are, making sure that we ourselves have a positive attitude and thinking about how to cultivate that if that's something that we didn't grow up with or internalize at earlier stages. How can we shift that perspective, and how can we develop that trust in our values that we could pass them on to our children? And finally, just one last word. I think a different kind of trust that parenting requires is trusting that our kids will love us, even if we need to discipline them, even if we're strong parents who have standards that we believe in and we educate to. This is not easy because in the moment, right? You're so mean. You're the meanest Ima. I wish I had different parents. I wish I had parents who didn't care how much I was on my phone, or I wish I had parents who let me come back, whatever. Those are the issues we're struggling with. Well, let me come back whatever time of night or in the morning that I wanted to. But we need to trust and to tell our children that, okay, I understand why this is hard for them. I understand why it's hard when everyone around them and whatever. But these rules or ideas or standards are coming because I love them and I care about them, and because we have principles that we believe in and that we think are worthy and that are worthwhile and that will guide them. Meaning we could be with them in the struggle and not trivialize it or invalidate it, and at the same time say that, but this thing, this value, this standard is really, 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 really important. I'm going to stand behind it no matter how much you push and how much you call me a mean Ima. Like, this is really, really important. I believe in it, not because I'm trying to torture or make your life difficult, but because I think that there's real value here. So there was a boy once here in yeshiva who told us that he had no computer rules as a kid, and he thought he was the luckiest kid around, that all his other friends, at least a bunch of his close friends, had limits and their parents checked up on them, they had filters, and he had no rules. And now, as a 20-something-year-old, he came to talk to us about how much anger, so much anger he had at his parents because of the pornography addictions that he had developed over time, that he blamed on his poor parents. Because why didn't they care enough to check in on me ever? Why didn't they ever open the door to my room to see what I was doing? Why didn't they help me set boundaries when I couldn't set them for myself? So what he had thought was the loving, wonderful parents who let him do whatever he wanted as a high school kid ended up being much more complex as he grew up, and he felt that somebody should have been there to kind of help him set those boundaries when he was struggling on his own. So it's hard work to be a parent. I think in my own life, there's nothing as taxing, as draining, as exhausting. I think every night, I basically end the night by talking to one of my sisters and saying, like, God willing, they're going to turn out great, but like, I may not make it there to enjoy it. But our hope is that we're investing in something long-term. And that if God willing, we learn to really, really trust ourselves that with time and maturity, our kids will hopefully come to trust those convictions as well. So I'm going to turn now to see if there's any questions in the chat. In the last couple of minutes that we have, I know the next session isn't scheduled to start for a while, so we have some time to look at some of the questions if there are. But before that, I just wanted to mention that recently I was able, thank God, it's not something I ever expected and kind of came about, but I was able to write up some of these issues of trust and fear, both in decision-making and in parenting and education. So the book has just been published by Koren. It's actually not yet available in bookstores, but it will be in a few weeks. But Koren, as a special promo to the attendees of this conference, have made the book available. It's called What Do You Really Want? Trust and Fear in Decision-Making at Life's Crossroads and Everyday Living. And the book, you can find it at the bottom of the page of this class or on the speaker page. So anyone who's interested in taking a look at that, if you look at the page from Koren, you'll be able to see more about the topics that are addressed there. So thank you so much for joining. It's been wonderful to be with you tonight. And I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now, so it's wishing everybody a wonderful rest of this conference. So amazing what's been made available to us. And if anyone's interested in reaching out, always available by email, Shayna Goldberg, Shayna, Shayna.Goldberg@gmail.com. Have a great week.